there, discuss the key topics in talking related to work, workplace productivity, employee experience. So if you want to be in the know, come join us each morning, be it on Facebook, be it on YouTube, or wherever else you like to get your content. If you would like to receive ahead of time the links to the articles we're going to talk about, the screenshots that we present, we've put a link down below. You can sign up, and we'll send those to you ahead of the show, and that will allow you to be in the know. And if you want, you can even share it on your own social media channels. What we're going to talk about. So who are we? I'm Steve Todd. I'm the founder of Open Source Workplace and Global Head of Workplace at NASDAQ. My co-host, Mr. Mike Petruski, Workplace Innovator Podcast. How you doing, Mike? Good morning.
Good morning, Steve. I've known you for all these years, and I love the way you call me Petruski. It's Petruski. Not that I care.
I know.
I love it. When I was a kid, it brings me back to my childhood because my coach would always yell at me, Petruski, because I wasn't doing well or slacking behind the rest of the group or the team. So that's what it reminded me of. I came back to my teen awkward years there. But how are you this morning?
I am doing
Happy Friday.
Well. I'm doing well. Happy Friday to you too as well, sir. How
Enjoyed
you
that
doing?
Intro.
Thank
Very
you,
good.
Thank you. We're trying to get
Set
a little more formal. Maybe not formal.
You will.
I don't
and
think
then I bring it right down.
I don't
you
think
start
we'll
off
ever be
nice
formal.
and professional, and look what I do. So
Yeah.
I apologize in advance, folks.
No
But
need to
we have
apologize.
great content. Steve is a master
We do.
preparer, and I am not. So this is a good balance.
So let's give the folks a little insight, Mike, into what we're going to be discussing today, because
Cool.
what we try to do, just to sort of give the audience a little bit of an intro, is we basically go through and we scour content that we find that is interesting, relevant, we'd like to talk about, and then we share it. We don't really coordinate that much, and then we sort of pull this thing together to actually see what it all is and what everyone's talking about each day. So here we have
What's going on? Yeah.
four articles here. A new wave of remote workers, and we're going to get into that a little bit, into explaining really what we mean. It's completely different to what you would expect, but we're going to tie it back into real estate, into workplace, into work. Talent in the real estate company in the future. Is remote work here to stay? Again, this article was a lot deeper than what the headline maybe suggests. And then the last thing is how to ensure workplace does not become a new source of COVID-19 infections. And there's one specific element of this that I kind of want to focus on, and it's the mobility manager. So that's what we're going to chat about today. So let's just dive right in, Mike. Let's dive right in.
A full plate, Steve.
So I did flip it as I put together the agenda, and as I was putting together the program, I went, no, let me start with this. And this is remote work here to stay? So
yes,
this is really
move on. Next article. I'm sorry. Is there more to it than that? Yes, the answer is yes.
I love it. But what's so interesting about this article, Mike, I find anyway, was it made the correlations in a J curve between remote working and new technologies, in a sense that for each organization, whenever you implement new technologies, it takes a little bit of time for a learning and developing perspective from the people within that organization who are developing are utilizing that new technology. And then there's this J curve, right, where you're shooting up, right? So it's kind of like the hockey stick. And it was comparing remote working to that concept, which I find a very interesting perspective to look at it. So in other words, even though we look at it today and we may be thinking, there's teething problems or whatever that is, actually we will get better at this. Organizations will get better at this. We'll learn how to develop and how to be collaborative and how to do multiple things as we do this more often.
Yeah, I love this article. I appreciate you sharing it with me. And I agree that I said tongue in cheek, yes, it's here to stay. Of course, there's always been an element of us, I'm one of them, that has been a remote worker full time for a long time. 3% was the number I usually heard of the overall workforce, or the overall knowledge worker base. That's now at, depending on which one of these articles you believe, I guess 90% of us are now working from home in some capacity, and even full time during the quarantine and lockdown. So yeah, there was the J curve, the initial drop off in productivity and the scramble to get acclimated to this new thing and learn Zoom and turn your camera on and get all those protocols in place. But I've seen it over the last 4 months, certainly an increase in efficiency, a an adaptability of myself and my team, because it did change the way I worked. There should be a whole nother special. I need to do this on my live stream, maybe a podcast episode. What happened to the world of remote workers pre-pandemic versus today? Because everybody's focused on how everybody left the office and had to figure out how to work from home or set up their home office. Those of us that were very comfortable and very productive being in our own little island and our own little world were disrupted in a lot of ways, because our whole team all of a sudden became remote workers with us, and that changed the dynamics of our interactions and relationship digitally. So that's another side conversation. But yeah, this J curve now shooting straight up, where productivity now goes through the roof. And according to these articles and some of the research, we're seeing, real examples of CEOs and workplace leaders of all types, organizational leaders, saying this is working. We're surprised that our business is moving forward, productively and effectively. And it's really going to impact how things return in this new reality. If there is a return, it's more of an adjustment, adaptation, a continuing evolution of a hybrid approach, as we've discussed here, between the slow migration of some back to offices and office settings, rethinking the office, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, and then also just many of us continue to work as remote workers. So interesting times.
It certainly is. It certainly is. And I just want to give a shout out. We received a comment from a Mr. Alec Dinkoff. You may remember Alec, who was
I've heard of Alec,
our master editor in chief,
friend.
Unlost friend.
He is up early this morning.
He is
Again,
up early
Alec,
from
go
the
back
West
to bed.
Coast.
Come on, my friend.
I know, but he said hello, so
rest.
we gotta reach out and say hello to Alec. How you doing, Matt?
Good to see him. Good to hear from him.
All right, so as we move on, so we talked a little bit. Okay, this remote working, and we talked about the J curve, and what does that mean for people, where they're going to live, how they're going to live in the future. And this article, which is a new way of remote working, could really impact the rental markets. And what we're looking at here is a study of the various locations around the world, or across the US, and what's having a major impact in rental rates. So if we look at San Francisco is, it's down 11.8% year over year. But what's really important is what's really interesting is, you've got locations like Denver that actually is down 10%. And then you've got cities like Philadelphia where actually it's increasing 15% year over year. Now, obviously, understanding that this is supply and demand. And we've put links to this article, and we've also put links to this research where you can actually go through the top 100 rental locations across the country. So you'll be able to find that information if you want to sort of dig a little deeper. But in essence, what this is saying is the big cities, actually, rental rates are dropping. Those secondary markets, rental rates are increasing. But also, if you move more to suburbia, the rental rates are increasing as well. So Sacramento, Philadelphia, secondary markets that you may sort of see where, if you're in New York City, Philadelphia, it's an hour away by Amtrak, a little bit longer if you're driving, but in essence, it's relatively close for that northeastern corridor. Sacramento, relatively close to San Francisco, again, but you can get a lot, and obviously renters can get a lot more for their money in those various locations. So it is a real indication that, while this remote working and working from home perhaps may continue over time, it is going to have a material impact. And maybe this is a metric that we sort of watch going forward, Mike, that allows us to really see what is actually the sentiment within these various cities.
Yeah, I'm going to let you do the analysis of this one, Steve, because I'm not a numbers guy. You are. But all I'll say from a layman's perspective and just a gut feeling, logic perspective, this is what interests me a lot, because there's been a conversation, we've had it here, if remote work is permanent and here to stay, and all of a sudden those that were driving or commuting, taking the subway, taking metro and here in DC, or taking these commuter buses that the high-tech firms were, had in place in Silicon Valley, where they sit on a bus for an hour or 2 hours and working on their laptops on Wi-Fi. If that begins to spread and all of these workers begin to move further and further from the city center and therefore further from their offices, there's a pro and con discussion here, and we can have that conversation about what it really means to the workforce overall, to individuals, employees. Is it good for employees? Does it help their position? Is it better for employers? Gives them more freedom to select from a global employment pool. gives it works both ways, as you said yesterday. But as far as the real estate, market, and you're a real estate guy, what is your take on this? And you're in New York City too. So what are you thinking when you see these numbers? Is this just the beginning of a trend, or is it temporary, or how are you looking at this? And what indicators will you look at? What should I be looking for? What should we all be looking at in the months and years to come to see if this is a true paradigm shift in real estate?
So the big indicator for me is San Francisco, right? We talk about Silicon Valley. We know how much that drives tech development, also drives trends in workplace, office setups, and also how people and organizations function and take guidance from, right? So if their rental rates are decreasing that much, 11%, 11.8% year over year, therefore the demand is dropping, the supply is increasing. Therefore, one has to determine that there's people leaving, exiting the city. If Oakland, which is very close to San Francisco, Sacramento, which isn't that far away, are increasing in rents, then one has to think there's a migration taking place, because people feel they don't have to go to the office. They don't have to worry too much about that commute. Therefore, it's a step towards actually being completely disconnected from a actual location. And I think it's a trend that I think we keep watching. I think people are going to be migrant in how they're moving, how they're going to live in the future. And those are sort of be the trends that I'd be looking for. So what is the city specific that you're looking at, but then also what are the actual adjoining districts? So like for New York is down 2%, which isn't, it's down 1.7%, which doesn't seem a lot year over year, but it's down 2% month over month. So it'll be interesting to watch this trend going forward. But actually, if you look at Newark and New Jersey, it's increasing. So people may have exited the city, may have moved to a suburb. Therefore, they're making the decision to leave the city for whatever reason. I'm not trying to make assumptions here about why people may be leaving. Sure. People can do that for themselves, but actually moving to suburbs where actually lower rents, but also easier access to larger properties, maybe perhaps some gardens, little things that I made my decisions on. Exactly, right? So if I'm going to be home for longer, then I want a larger place. I want to be able to walk easily outside, and those would be the trends of how I'd be looking at this.
Yeah, it's ironic. You mentioned Silicon Valley, and the article touched on this, that these big tech firms, who are the first to announce that remote work, if the employees want it, will be a permanent option for them, are the same companies that were really leading the way in workplace and really investing a lot into these beautiful headquarter campuses, Apple's spaceship and Googleplex and all these different huge, investments in building the office of the future, and Microsoft rebuilding their campus outside of Seattle in Redmond. I mean, these are interesting times, and obviously this pandemic, COVID-19, has disrupted a lot of plans, but boy, how significant is it that all these firms that were the ones leading the charge in how the rest of the marketplace was saying, what do we need to do to create amenities and create an attractive workplace, a great headquarters experience, user experience, employee experience. And that's going to be a continuing conversation, as some of the other articles say. It's now even more so. I think this is interesting too. I want to hear your take on it, but keep going on your agenda. But is it even more important that we focus on employee experience, user experience in the workplace, now that everybody is so convinced they can do their job effectively remotely? It's going to be even more of a challenge for real estate and workplace leaders to bring those folks into the office, I think. And that's something we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we will. And it's an interesting question you asked. And, I just want to mull over that sort of just for a second. We can come back to it. But
sure. Yeah.
It's in essence where you said, the employee experience in the workplace. Is that the question, or is that the thing we should be looking at? Or should it be employee experience at work?
Wherever work takes place.
Wherever work takes place, you know what I mean? And it is traditionally,
there.
But you're absolutely right. We do typically look at it through the lens of employee experience in the workplace, but perhaps we have to change the narrative or ask a different question: employee experience at work. But we'll come back to it, obviously, as we look at different articles. So this was a great article by Andrew Slumbers. Great guy. Follow him a lot on Twitter, on obviously LinkedIn. Great content. Posts a blog. So talent in the real estate company of the future. And as we think about this, Andrew actually looked at things from a very digital perspective. So what is the future of the digital world? What is the future of AI? And how is that going to impact us? And how is it going to impact the work of the future? And here's where he's bringing all this together to really look at the situation of today, look at the technologies that are unfolding over the coming time and coming years, and what does that mean for the workplace of the future. So again, if you think about design, imagination, inspiration, all those various things, what is the value proposition that actually that's going to provide to the workplace, but also to work? And we almost need to think of it, I love this, but we need to think of the office as software and treat it like a tech companies treat their own software. So it really flips the narrative on, okay, so rather than seeing it as a fixed thing that people come to, how does it serve the hardware, right? So the hardware is almost traditionally you'd see it as the hardware, right? With the software being the people that move around it. Perhaps it's shifting in a sense it becomes a software, so it actually performs a purpose for the employees, where actually the employees become the hardware. It's a very interesting way to think of things. I don't know whether that's what you took about it, but also...
I took away that he said there's a process, a design, software design process, that you develop a tool, you put it out to your users, and then you let the users use that tool and give you feedback, and then make adjustments on the way. So it's almost this agile term that's used in software development, and we've tried to apply it to the workplace. Is we need to be reading the signs, watching how our users interface and interact with their spaces, with their amenities, with their technologies, with the digital workplace, and it's holistic. It's got to be, as you said, everything, not just the building and the physical space where they are, sometimes, but that experience away from the office, away from their desk, away from any fixed location. So that concept that he was describing about software development, design, implement, test, get feedback from the users, and then adjust and continue to enhance is something that really struck me as interesting. But this is the article too, Steve, and it's a long article. I recommend people take the time to dive in, because this is one I did read all the way through. And what was interesting to me, and this is what I was referring to in my prior answer, was he's saying things that I've been saying, you've been saying, we've been hearing at conferences for years, about user experience, employee experience. And yes, we usually, if we're at a real estate and facility management conference, it's focused on that user experience in the building or the workplace as we traditionally defined it. And it's a broader situation than that, but we've already been talking about this evolution. The workplace evolutionaries have talked about the freedom, the mobility, the choice and control that employees want and need and have to be their happiest, most productive selves. So all these things he's talking about, user experience wise, in this new context of living during a pandemic and beyond, with so many of us away from the traditional physical space. And he said, though, if I'm not mistaken, that he said there's a extra pressure. He was approaching this topic from the perspective of real estate leaders, and then listen, the hesitance you've had to innovate and change and remove yourself from the status quo. The real estate market, commercial real estate, has been booming for the last decade, and just like the buggy whip market was booming before the Model T came out, and even beyond after the introduction of the Model T, that horses, there were more horses in New York City than ever before, right before it all went away. So listen, folks, we've been telling you for a long time in real estate that you need to innovate and really be creative about how you approach your buildings and your portfolios. And as I don't know all the different players out there that are watching your channel here, but they're all in that industry, and they've known this has been on the horizon for a long time. And they probably were like, skeptical. I don't really need to make any big changes to the way I run my business in real estate, but you tell me, is this that, what was the term he used? The burning, I want to say burning bush moment, but it wasn't. It was like burning moment. That this COVID-19 situation is that burning situation that just, it's the invention of the Model T. It changes the way that we will all look at real estate going forward. Doesn't mean it's going to go away. Doesn't mean as horse and buggies did go away, but I think there's a future for real estate and for physical workplaces. You and I are passionate about that. There are things we can get done in person in those spaces that you can't do remotely.
Right.
But it becomes incumbent on workplace and real estate leaders to now convince employees even more that it's worth it to come in and make that way to the office.
And
what do you think?
You capsulate it absolutely spot on, where it's a mindset shift, right? And you take the last point that he made, and also Stacey Chambers, who's actually watching as well, made the point in the comments. Real estate is no longer about satisfying needs. It is about creating the desire, right? So you go back to the points you were making, right? What is the desire that actually is going to entice people to come in and utilize that space? And if we go back to the first thing we talked about, is it's what actually are we creating? What are we creating for? What are we designing for? And then how's all that going to impact the remote work of the future? So beautifully weaved together the red thread.
And it brings that final article, I think, to mind about mobility, right? That's the key challenge is one of the big hurdles. Am I jumping ahead too fast?
No.
Mobility article next? Because
it's about to come. No, it's not.
That's
actually
the piece you've been telling me about. We'll talk about it, but that's the piece that you've always talked about.
No,
and I've
it
always
is.
said
It is. It is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me about this, because you are a New York City guy who has told me over the last 4 months, when I keep saying, Steve, you're going to want to go back. You're going to want to get back to the office and do all those things, collaborate with your colleagues and have that human experience that is so important to us all. And you're like, Mike, I don't want to, I don't miss the 90-minute commute and the time on the subway. And that's how this article, spoiler alert, ends. This and another article I read, where we talk about all the things we're missing. Yeah, it's true, but this person was not ready to get on a subway again. So What do you think? Give us the synopsis here.
So the synopsis is primarily, we want to open the workplace, but we want to avoid causing infections again, right? And that's the whole point of it. Forrester actually provided this article on ZDNet, and as Forrester, a research company, so they've done a lot of research across Europe as to find out what actually needs to happen to ensure organizations can appropriately protect their employees and give them assurances that they're going to be safe when they come in. And they went through enable work from home remote policies, which is intuitively you would say, okay, that's fine. Support travel during off hours and promote alternative to public transport. That's fine, and then those, I think those first two are a given. But what I found really interesting was the third point, mobility, and the need for a mobility manager going forward. Because in essence, what this is saying, and the article is in great detail into the implications of it and who's actually implementing it. And it spoke specifically in Italy that it's actually a requirement, where this mobility manager for 12 months will manage how their team, how the employees will move between their home and also the workplace. They will track how people move to and from, and it allows one, also the company, but also the city and the whole country as a whole to really understand how COVID is moving, when it's moving, and also then allow them to take proactive measures should something then take. So it's a really great article. And again, Mike, we sort of see this mobility manager, we saw the remote experience, and as job titles, we're starting to see these things shift, right? We've talked about at length that actually this world that we operate in, the traditional view of a workplace manager, and I look at what I do, global head of workplace at NASDAQ, it's like, well, is that role going to be shifting? What is that role going to be coming to? And I'm sort of looking around and seeing all these different changes, and it's something we have to be conscious of. What is that of the future? But I love the concept of the mobility manager. I love what the role is. I love the purpose of it. It's a really good article.
Yeah, and again, just to get into some of the details that were discussed that were interesting to me is this idea of staggering schedules and being deliberate about when people will make that trip, because we want to minimize the risk. We want to, protect people as much as we can, and that means not having these crammed subway trains for 2 hours or 3 hours at the same time every day, but spreading things out, allowing people to come in at different times and avoid those big crowds. Is this something, now this is something, again, you have very much an interesting perspective on, because you were a guy who did this on a regular basis, 3 days a week. You would venture into the city And then you had already, just to set the stage for those who don't know, you don't live in New York City, but live outside. So you had already done the migration away, and you had just alluded to it earlier here that was for purposes like wanting more space and having a
Yep.
garden and
Yep.
being able to ride your bike. So you were saying, okay, I'm willing to commute a longer distance to get to my workplace, my physical building, certain number of days a week, and then other days I work from home. So you had this nice hybrid approach. Do you imagine yourself going back to that schedule or anything like it, or will it be totally different as we reimagine re-entering the workplace? This is something that you can really speak to personally, I think.
From a personal perspective, I find it really hard to answer. And the reason why I find it hard to answer is today I don't will I go back to the city in the next month, 2 months, 3 months? No, I won't. I won't get on the subway, I won't get on the train, and I don't see the benefit of going to the office to sit there in an enclosed open environment by myself. So I don't see the benefit in that. I'm so much more productive sitting here at home in my desk. Long term, I don't know, because I don't know how I will emotionally attach my feelings to that commute and being in the office and emotionally feel the separation from my team. I love being around my team, and I love being around individuals and sort of the organization as a collective. And we're also building out a brand new headquarter office, which is going to be fantastic. So there's a lot of things that are going to pull me to go. Do I think in my head I won't ever go back? No, I don't think that at all. Do I think I'm hesitant to go back? For sure, for sure.
Well, that's interesting because that's what so many people are probably thinking right
Yeah,
now. And we're
yeah,
having this conversation as if, next month or even in the near term, that organization is going to get it all figured out. But I think there's a lot of complicated pieces to this. And certainly your emotions, you alluded to them, your personal feelings, your feeling of vulnerability, your ability to work and how effective you are. Some, as we read in the article and other articles, they're really struggling with the work from home because of their situation, the lack of
right.
space, the lack of tools and connectivity and family and disruptions. So they are much more likely to rush to return to the workplace, the physical workplace. But what is the mobility manager? You said you're really interested in that role. And what do you think? Did I express what their job's going to be well enough, or is there more
Yeah.
that you think they can do? And again, put it in personal terms. I love this because if you had a mobility manager at NASDAQ that was going to do something, what would they do to help you feel more comfortable being safe back at that new beautiful headquarters when it opens? Is that, I don't want to personalize it too much, but I've already done it, so why not just go down this road?
Thanks, man. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. No, it's all
Put you on
good.
the
It's all
spot,
good.
Steve.
No, it's okay. I mean, that's the whole point of us being here, right? Um, so, how would a mobility manager help me get back to the office? Having a mobility manager in play will allow me to fully understand how that transit system is working, what the impact that is having, one in New York City, but two in the office, right, and how that is playing out. And the other emotional thing about it is where the new headquarter building is going to be, I only have to make one train ride, one from where I live into the center of New York City. I don't have to get on the subway, I can simply walk. So there's one barrier that's eliminated with the location of where the new headquarters is going to be. So that takes away mental emotions about having to get on the subway. So then my other thing is, okay, so the next step is, what is that transit, right? How many people are traveling that? Can the mobility manager allow me to understand how many people are traveling? What are the protocols? How many people are wearing masks? How many people are being infected in those things? And it's honestly, this is a society thing. It's not just an organizational thing. And it's basically, if every organization had this mobility manager, then then this be added on and be able to be shared? So if I contribute to this, I allow myself to be involved with this, will that then provide me with better information? Like, we always go back to the Uber example, right? We give everything to Uber so that whenever we get off that airplane, we can hit that button and a car just comes and picks us up. It's really
Sure.
simple, really easy. So can this be part of a transit system, or transit system app, or transit app, however we want to say
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Um,
Mobility app or some type of a
to
broader
allow, yeah,
perspective.
just to allow us to see how things are moving, and the impact it's going to have. So it can help, but it's more that what I find interesting more was it is a mandate for the country, and
Yeah, in Italy. And that
yeah,
was interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you doing that because that puts it in perspective. I'm sure those watching, it helps you hear a real world case. I love, on my podcast, asking people to tell stories that really, allow me to understand the practical implications of all this great content we read. And I think that really did that for us today. All this great content you prepared. Our time has gone by so fast, as it always does.
Yep.
When you prepare an agenda for us and we follow that agenda, it just goes by way too fast. But great talking to you, Steve, and good to hear your personal perspective. We'll continue to see how it evolves and how organizations rise up to face the challenges ahead. There are many of them.
There certainly are, and thank you. And thank you for those watching and those who shared comments. We appreciate it. We appreciate the feedback. We appreciate the interaction. So thank you. And have a great weekend, everybody. Take care, man. See you later.
See ya.